another episode of Wellness with EAC. I'm Nicole Guanzura, and I have the privilege of being your host on this podcast. I want you to feel like it's a safe space for you to talk about all things career wellness, your faith journeys, and let's get into it about how that affects our personal and professional lives. In today's episode, I want to talk specifically about identity. I've been having these conversations with some colleagues. I went through an identity crisis not too long ago, and there's some lessons that I've learned. And today I want to talk about what identity is, how we identify ourselves, and how to loosen that grip so you can be your authentic self. And a lot of this, I'm going to be talking about it within the context of the workplace as an entrepreneur. But of course, because if this isn't your first episode, you've come to know that I am also a mom, a wife. I run my own business. I'm really passionate about women's ministry. So there are a couple of areas where already you can see where I pull and identify with. So I want us to talk about some of those areas, or insert here for your identifiers and how you align with the things that matter to you in your life. Or let's be real with some of the things that we align and identify with that just don't serve us, things that are just not good for us anymore in our season of life. So I pulled up the definition of identity from Psychology Today. And their definition says, identity encompasses the memories, experiences, relationships, and values that create one's sense of self. This amalgamation creates a steady sense of who one is over time, even as new facets are developed and incorporated into one's identity. And we're going to talk about pieces of that definition. We'll start off with the top half about what identity encompasses. And we'll talk about the second half as well, because we are evolving over time. You are not the same person you were as a teenager. You're not the same person that you were as a college student or when you first started your career, and not the same person when you had kids, when you got married and different life stages happened, had your first job. So I want us to talk about that. So I really like this definition from Psychology Today because it talks about those memories and experiences. And one of the things I was reflecting on that really prompted this conversation was a few years ago. It's been almost 3 years now since I left my traditional 9-to-5 role. And my entire career, I'd really prided myself in my title at work. The way that people identified and associated with me, and when they asked me, oh, tell me about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? All of those things. I always went straight for telling them about my title and where I worked and what I did, which is not a bad thing as such, but I went through a stage where when I left my job, even though it was my choice, I went through this identity crisis where I was trying to navigate and figure out, well, who am I if I'm not this title, if I'm not in this role, if I don't identify with this position in this company? And at the time, I knew I had talents I wanted to explore, not really sure that I was going to start a business, maybe do some consulting. All I knew I needed was a timeout. That's all. That's it. So what I didn't account for was this experience of loss, and feeling like I've lost something because I don't have this identity. I've lost a piece of myself. Who am I? And I felt embarrassed. I felt flustered anytime people would ask me, oh, okay, so you're not working. What are you doing? Who are you? And I didn't know how to answer that question for a little while. And now when I look back at that time and at that season, I realized that I had molded myself into that identity, right? And many of us do that because that is the cultural, for many of us, it's a cultural component. You are identified by, you are Dr. So and so, you are engineer, especially for me, I always take into context my African background and culture. I am African through and through. So there is a lot of identity that's placed in, oh, because you have this board position here, you are a CEO here, you have this position in this place. And so that's what your family looks at and says, we have done a great job because this daughter of ours, the son of ours, has been able to secure this job and has this really fancy title. So for me, because that had been ingrained in me, and that's just a part of my identity and culture, I just went with it. So I didn't know how to do without it. And I was scrambling a lot. I went through, like I said, a bit of shame, a bit of embarrassment. I went through anger with myself because I knew that walking away was the best thing for me in that season. So why was I chastising myself for from walking away from it? There was so much more that I had to dig deeper into to decipher who I am and how I identify. And let me tell you, now it's great that I own my own company. I'm the CEO, I'm the founder, a managing member, however you want to title it that day. But for me, it's just not that serious anymore. And I had to go through leaving my job, digging in deeper into that, coming into the CEO role, and I started to feel less than even there because I'm like, you're a CEO of a small company. How dare you even compare yourself to C-suite folks that are in Fortune 500s, that are in larger organizations, that are in small to mid-sized companies? You are practically micro, sis. How do you even identify alongside with those folks? They have more experience. They have all of this. And you know what I wasn't doing in that time? I wasn't identifying with the experiences that I've had, right? The definition right here talks about the memories, the experiences, the relationships, the values that you create, right? To make that sense of self. I was not thinking about all of that. I just so badly wanted to identify with a title, with a certain thing. And if you're anything like me today, you go for something, you're rushing for it, and you think it's going to be the end all be all. But when you get to that stage and all of a sudden you think, well, this was great and all. Now I'm going to move forward. This was wonderful. Now it's not as valuable to me because you're not taking the time to soak in the presence of that experience, the accomplishment of that experience, the way that, it has evolved with now who you are, right? The second part of that definition of identity talks about the facets that are developed and incorporated into your identity. So now that you've gotten a new degree or you have gotten a new certification, you've gotten a promotion at work, there's something new that you're doing, all of a sudden that is adding to who you identify with today, how you identify today. So let's talk about then, that leads so perfectly into how we identify ourselves. For me, what was a breakthrough for me specifically with not so closely associating myself with fleeting identities, was really my faith. Obviously, as you know, about topic, part of what we talk about in this podcast is my faith. I wholly identify as an accepted, a loved daughter of the Most High King, a daughter who belongs, who's a co-heir in Christ, who is made in the image of God. And so when I think about that, everything else pales in comparison. Everything else that I do pales in comparison because first and foremost, I identify as being a daughter of my creator. He is the one who made me who I am, my personality, my quirks, all of the things that make me uniquely me, right? When we talk about our authentic selves, yes, it's from these experiences. Yes, it's from our values, but at the core of our beings, I really believe that at the core of at least my being, I truly believe that that came from the fact that it was made in the image of God. And as I identify with him, then that comes along with the grace and the mercy and the favor and the forgiveness that comes when I stumble along the way. And there's no better place to identify and lay comfort in for me. So, how do you identify on your end? Where do those core beliefs and values come from that allow you to identify with certain positions, certain opportunities that you take on, certain things, organizations, engagements, and things that you get yourself involved in? And what about life aspects as well, right? So for me, I have my overarching identity, and then I have the privilege of being a wife, a mother. I have the privilege of being a friend, a daughter, a sister, all of these other identities that I really align with. And I love that. And I love to associate with because that's also a part of what helps me identify with other people who have commonalities, who have similarities to me that I might want to interact. Or maybe because I know the things that I identify with, then I'm looking at someone else who has a different set of values and identities. And I think to myself, okay, well, how can I associate with that person? How can I connect with that person? Where do we find some common ground? And that is a skill that you need to have as you're coming into the workplace, as you're negotiating contracts, as you are navigating your entrepreneurial journey, your career journey. Those are important skills to have. Um, so again, how do you identify, right? What are those roles and titles that you associate with? I want you to dig even deeper into if it was all taken away today, if you were sitting right here and having the conversation with yourself that you're no longer the program manager for this role, you are no longer the director of this role for this big old company, then who are you? Are you still going to be really happy with who you are at your core? And if you are, then you know that everything else that you're going to be doing around you is as a result of knowing who you are. When you think about being your authentic self, it's because you know who you are. So if this role is suddenly taken from you or you walk away from it, right? We are not completely out of the season of layoffs. Now they're just getting a different name. Now that it's being called repositioning. Now it's being called a number of things. And so the great layoff of 2023, all of those things that were happening, it's not that they're gone, they're still there. So what happens? Do you still happily identify with who you are? And you're so happy if one of those facets is taken away? Do you still embrace the experiences that you got from that in order to transfer that to your next opportunity, whatever that might look like? So something to think about, something that I had to go through, and something that I have to keep reminding myself over and again. And reminding my friends, we remind each other, we hold each other accountable when life is really tough, when contracts may be a little bit slow. I just had a conversation with a friend at church and we were just resonating about that as well. And she's like, yeah, I went through it. And if you're not talking about it with your colleagues, with your friends, with your trusted group of folks, sometimes you feel like you're going through this journey by yourself. And that is the whole objective of thinking about your career from a wellness point of view, your well-being, right? It comes from having conversations and talking to folks about the things you're going through because you're likely not the only one. So I hope you resonated with some of what I was talking about and some of the conversations I had to have with myself, with others. Sometimes it might mean reaching out to a professional and talking to someone, right? That is part of Career Wellness 101. I talk more about it in that particular episode, but that might mean you're talking to someone because you're grieving the loss of this identity that you had. And it's fair, it's not silly, it's not. It's just a part of who you have been. So that's really what I think about when I think about my take on identity, what it means. And also, I wanted to share that little bit about how we identify ourselves. So, in that same notion, I want to talk about, I want you to ask yourself, as you're trying to figure out how you truly identify, you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, why does this matter so much? Why does this job title, why does this next thing matter so much? Where is that rooted from? Why do I feel like I'm not going to be the same? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying stop yourself from being ambitious, going for the gold, going through that career trajectory that you have set for yourself, that you have worked hard for, that you've seen career counselors about, that you have seen as a necessary trajectory. Absolutely. But as you're doing that, ask yourself, well, why does it matter so much? And if this thing were to go away today, would I be completely shattered and broken? And if your answer is yes, then I need you to just make sure that you reset. Talk to somebody about that because you are more than just your title. Do you hear me? Do you understand me? Are we together on this? You are more than your title at work. You are more than the big shiny company that you work at. However, it's important to also recognize that once you identify and knowing that, okay, this is just a part of my identity, but it's not everything in who I am, then you find yourself that your approach to your work is going to be that much greater. When somebody does something that you take offense to, you're not going to be as gripped about it because you're really realizing, okay, you know what? I'm going to handle this a certain way. I'm going to follow the protocols and what I need to. I'm going to escalate things if it's necessary. I'm going to have a conversation, but I'm not going to go home and wallow for the rest of the week because that thing did not go well. That thing was just really, really horrible. And all of a sudden, you can't do everything else in your life because you're so caught up in your job. You're so caught up in what you're doing. I've said this before in previous episodes. I will say it again. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. And I know that sounds morbid, but tomorrow is not guaranteed. So how are you living your life well today? How are you able to then contribute to your workplace and realizing, okay, you know what? The things that we're doing at work are important. I'm going to contribute to my job because I love the work that I do. I'm really good at it. This role has never been the same or will never be the same because I have put my sauce on it. I am the sauce that makes this role that much better. And so when you're looking at things like that, then you also pull away from, did they just hire me because I look like this, or I have this experience, or I'm this age, and start categorizing yourself and messing yourself up. Then you remember they hired me because I am qualified to be in this place. They hired me because I was bringing that sauce to that role, and therefore I belong here in this season of my life. But however, if I decide to walk away or they decide it's game over for me right here, I'm gonna be all right, right? Cue Kendrick Lamar. If everybody, whoever knows that song, right? You're gonna be all right. You're gonna be okay. And you are more than capable of embracing that, right? And I also want you to have that attitude when you think about how you progress in your roles at work. I will give you an example. When I started, there was a role I started. And I thought, I'm way too qualified for this. What do you mean? This is so offensive. I could not be in this role. This is way past my education. I let my ego drive me all the way into the parking lot. But then I took that role because one, it was something that my mentor had recommended for me as because I had expressed I wanted to try something different. I wanted to do something else. And that was the opening. And when I'd previously applied for a role at that organization, I didn't get it. But then another opportunity rose. And this was my foot in the door, right? That was my foot in the door. And once I got there, I stayed in that role for a little bit. And then I started to advocate for myself. There were windows of opportunity where I could negotiate into a more appropriate role, into a more aligned role with my qualifications and experiences. But guess what? While I was in that role that initially I was thinking, oh, it's so much lesser, I did my best. I did what I needed to do. I showed up every day with a smile on my face, even when the days were hard too, and I couldn't muster up all that smile. I showed up, and my workplace etiquette never slipped. And my experiences that I gained from that helped me because now I better understood the organization and I could navigate internally. I could navigate internally. And so for me, while I'm not saying go ahead and take whatever role that does not pay you as much, that does not align with your role, but if it's something that you really want to do and it's an organization that you really want to navigate, take that foot in the door. You never know. Take that window into the organization, and you never know where that's going to lead you. And those decisions are made when you remove yourself from just identifying as, no, I need to be this because I am this. There is confidence and then there's arrogance, and there's a fine line in between when it comes to pursuing the things that you really want to do, when it comes to pursuing that next role in your career, when it comes to pursuing that next client. I want you to be confident, but I also want you to be reasonable with that confidence, right? Make that calculated jump as you're doing things. But if you know you can put in the work and that window is going to be opened by establishing a relationship, just like networking, right? When you're trying to talk to somebody and get to know someone, you're not opening the door and saying, hey, hello, how are you? Please buy my product. No, it's, hey, how are you? How are you doing? You know, this is who I am. I saw this thing. I thought that was really interesting. Do you have, and let them respond. When they respond, see if there's an opening. Do you have time for a coffee chat? I'd love to learn more about your work, and just do a lot of listening and really understand whether there's a next opportunity for you to then say, okay, you know what? I'd love to talk more about that, right? Here's some thoughts around it. What do you think? And just opening those doors so you're not bulldozing, you're not barreling through them. You are strategically navigating them, because what happens when you're just chipping through, you get to understand, oh gosh, think of a weight bearing wall, a load bearing wall in a home. If you don't know that it's holding up a load and you just bulldozer through it, your roof is coming down, your ceiling is coming down. And then what have you done? Piled a lot of expenses. But if you do the necessary navigating, understand, look at the plans for the home, look at the blueprint and understand, okay, this is what this load bearing wall is. Okay, it's great. So I can't take off this column, or this thing can be moved over here, and I can go ahead and bulldoze on this side, or I can pick away at this or put a new paint job on this thing. But it's because you've done the work, you've done the pre-work, you've done the research. And then so that way, when you're navigating, it is going to be a less stressful path, honestly. And let's be real, honestly, you could still do all the things and it still could be a hot mess express. That happens too, and that's okay. But friend, the confidence I want you to have from this conversation is knowing that once you identify who you are, there is no job, there is no relationship, there is no anything that is going to come in and completely change your identity because you are so confident in who you are, so that a job can come in, a relationship can come in, and it only enhances the experiences around you. I was talking to someone earlier today, and they said that every person you meet is going to be a blessing or a lesson. And I'm taking that with me and I'm running away with it because I absolutely love that. So, as you are sure in your core value, in your identity, the next thing that you're going to be doing is, well, okay, is this role? I've taken on this role, I've experienced this thing. Is there a blessing coming out of it, or is it a lesson? And now, what lessons am I taking that's going to make me stronger in my identity, that I'm going to pass on to the next person or keep building who I am? Oh, this relationship, this relationship I've developed. Okay, was it a blessing or a lesson? Okay, what am I taking away from that? What do I own from this? And what do I completely put onus on the other person? How do I navigate those next steps? So I hope this is helpful for you, because for me, it was really helpful just understanding who I am and whose I am, right? And just understanding who I was at the core of my identity. And that really helped me so that I'm not so attached to so many things. It's not that I don't care. I deeply care. I deeply care, but my perspective around it has shifted. It doesn't break me anymore. I can walk away from a contract. I can walk away from a certain thing if it no longer serves me, if it no longer serves the values, and I'm going to navigate that conversation as best as I can, because I don't want to burn a bridge, but it's also important that I don't burn myself out while I'm at it. So, what are your thoughts? Again, I want you to think about how do you identify yourself? What is your core identity? Put it in the comments. I would love to know. What aha moments did you have when you realized that you tied your identity so greatly to something that didn't stick around? How did you bounce back from that? I would love to know. And also, how do you show up as your authentic self now that you've identified who you are? Does that edify who you are right now and how you're showing up at work? Or does that slightly shift because maybe it's giving you a little bit of freedom to recognize who you are and to walk into the greatness and excellence of who you are, right? So I'd love to learn. I'd love to learn your perspective. I want to hear more about, what topics you want to hear from in these solo episodes. A lot of them are talking from experiences. They're coming from guest contributions. So bring them on in, put them in the show notes, reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, Nicole Guanzura. I would love to connect with you. Let me know what your favorite part was from the podcast. Let me know what you really identified with, or, what thing you disagreed with. Let's talk about it. That's part of having really good and healthy conversations. So until next time, be well, take care, and I cannot wait to see you and talk with you next Wednesday.